IT/OT convergence, developing an Mssp cyber governance model for industrial settings, and ransomware response best practices when an Mssp is infected. That and the latest news and trends in the managed security space coming right up on Cyber for Hire.
Building bridges between managed security providers and their clients, it's the podcast where MSPs, vCISOs, and end users take a united stand against cybercrime. This is Cyber for Hire.
Cyber for Hire, the managed security podcast, would like to thank the following initial launch sponsors for supporting our program: Aptega, AT&T Cybersecurity, Cisco, NetSurian, and Stellar Cyber. Be sure to keep watching future episodes for more details on these sponsoring organizations. In the meantime, to learn more about our sponsors, you can visit us at msspalert.com/sponsors for additional information. And of course, be sure to get your fill of timely news and analysis from our partnering digital brands, SC Media, MSSP Alert, and Channel E2E. All right, welcome to episode number 4 of Cyber for Hire. How's everybody doing today? I'm Bradley Barth with SC Media in New York, and joining me today on the other side of the Continental Divide is my co-host and partner in cybercrime, Ryan Morris, principal consultant with Morris Management Partners. How's it going today, Ryan?
Going very well. It's freezing cold outside, but we're in here with some hot topics, so can't wait to get started.
Absolutely. And in fact, speaking of hot topics, I'm going to share a little something of what's on my mind. I'm thinking about this whole FTX mess today. A little Christmas pun in there. Merry FTXmas is what everybody's dealing with right now, because we've got this FTX cryptocurrency exchange. It's filed for bankruptcy due to some possibly even criminal mismanagement of funds. A development that once again has shaken the crypto investment industry. In fact, Channel E2E recently reported that multiple MSP software company investors and owners invested in FTX trading back in 2021 as part of a funding round, and now those investments might be worthless. So where am I going with this? Well, we know crypto can be very volatile in nature. It still has a lot of security and regulatory concerns around it. That's why some folks are really big believers in investing in it, and others are still steering clear. I'm wondering, Ryan, where you sit on the fence on this. Have you personally invested in any crypto? Why or why not? And if not crypto, was there maybe some other investment opportunity that you had the chance to get in on the ground floor where you didn't, and now you go either, oh man, I wish I did, I'd be a millionaire right now, or thank God I didn't?
Investing is one of those things where when it goes well, we're the smartest people we've ever met. Like, of course, I did my research, I know everything. When it doesn't go well, it's like, well, I mean, these were factors beyond my control, and I didn't want anybody to think that this was looking bad on my reputation. I will tell you, I absolutely, positively did not invest in crypto. And I'm looking back saying, I am the smartest guy I know, right? It's clearly not that. It's obviously just one of those things where it didn't meet my threshold for fundamentals, right? I tend to be much more based on revenue minus cost of goods equals gross margin and then growth for company performance. This one absolutely just never had any of that. And so while it was a trend and there was momentum, that's not the way I was making the decisions. And so I want to stand back in that group of I told you so folks and be the one who's saying, you really should have been much more sober and serious as an investor. But let's mitigate that with the observation that I was working at a channel company that was responsible for a lot of the go-to-market and through channel sales for Apple back in the 90s when we were presented with the opportunity to buy Apple at $2. Now, looking back on that one, all I got to say is, buying that private island would have been awesome.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It didn't happen because I missed it just like everybody else missed it. And there were all kinds of logical reasons why. It just brings us back to the fact that, hey, in technology, there's innovation and then there's implementation. And if we, the best products in the world don't necessarily always make the very best investments.
Yeah, no, that's true, and a nice little window into your soul that your own little private island is where what you would have wanted to do with your money. It's nice to dream, right? I mean, I personally myself, I've also steered clear on crypto, but that's mostly because I'm pretty much like a coward when it comes to investing, Ryan. But so I don't really have a great investing story in terms of like a brush with bankruptcy or a brush with making a fortune, because like I've never really very seriously considered investing my money like that. I have been told, and I really have no idea if this is true at all. It's maybe one of those stories that just gets passed down from generation to generation and gets warped, that my great grandfather passed on buying the development rights to the South Beach area of Miami. I'd like to think that's a completely made up story that got twisted over the years, because oh, my God, if that's true, that's another like, ouch, that one hurts. But, then I wouldn't be the modest, humble guy, we know and love today, perhaps, if I was, basking in the riches of, South Beach money. I don't know.
It would be warmer, but it would be much less humble.
All right. Well, Ryan, maybe why don't you tell our audience if they have got a good crypto or other type of investment story, how can they share their story with us?
That's an excellent point, right? Because let's keep this conversation going. Obviously, we are all in the technology industry, and we would love to hear what your experiences have been investing or not investing in crypto or other early stage technologies. So please send in your stories and your experience. We would love to feature some of those on future episodes. You can reach us at cyberforhire@cyberriskalliance.com. That's our email address. Or you might visit us on our show page, where you are finding all of the links and the downloads that we're going to be talking about through the episode here. But drop us an email, drop us a note, and we'd love to get your input as well.
All right. Well, I think we've invested more than enough time on this topic. You see what I did there? And so with that, it's time for our featured Mssp industry news topic of the day, presenting our big idea in business, IT-OT convergence, developing an Mssp cyber governance model for industrial settings. It's not uncommon for IT security professionals and OT engineers to be at odds with each other over cyber governance policies and procedures inside industrial settings. And when the IT professionals work for an outside firm, such as an MSP, then that can create another level of separation that can further expand the schism between IT and OT. And so with that in mind, we want to know, what are some of the key considerations that managed security providers and their industrial clients must account for in order to develop a governance framework that meets the needs of both IT security pros and OT engineers. Guiding us through this discussion today is Harpreet Sidhu. He is Global Managed Security Services Lead at Accenture. Harpreet has accumulated over 23 years of experience in managing and delivering complex global programs, building successful teams, and helping clients prepare, accelerate, and operate their cyber programs. Harpreet has deep expertise in security architecture, cloud and infrastructure security, identity and access management, cybersecurity operations, incident response and recovery, and risk management. He also acts as a quality assurance director on some of the largest security transformation and operations engagements across Accenture. Harpreet, I'm so very glad you could join us today.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. Really, really interesting topic.
Yeah. Well, as just expressed, there is this tug of war that sometimes happens in industrial environments between IT and OT. Rather if in a situation where rather than it being managed internally, you're bringing in a third-party MSSP for cybersecurity, the MSSP is going to have to referee this tug of war. So you really need to understand what both sides want out of this relationship. So let's set the stage by first asking, what's at stake? What's the consequence of not having the proper governance and policies in place?
So I think great way to start the conversation around understanding the risk and the consequences, right, of not having the basic structures of governance and foundation control and measurement in place. Obviously, with OT running a lot of our critical infrastructure, be it utilities, be it the grid energy distribution systems that we have, be it the oil and gas pipelines that run across the country, right? There's a big impact to health and human safety and the environment. So certainly, these are operations that have to run 24/7 without fail. So they require a lot of careful planning, and upkeep and availability is key to these operations because of what they do for us as running our infrastructure as well as supporting communities across the country. So it's important to have the right governance structure, the right people, the right processes, and the right technology to really support the upkeep and running of OT as well as IT operations.
So I'd love to follow up on that from a service provider's point of view. Most service providers, most MSPs grew up in a world of IT, right? The traditional Wintel stack, if it's attached to the network and it has an Ethernet address, hey, we know what that thing is and we are responsible for it. Mm-hmm. The world of OT tends to be a little bit mysterious, right? The irony is it predated the IT world. And it was very long ago connected to the network and given access to local and remote system control. In your experience, as you look at the service provider world, is there a deep understanding of what's going on the other side of the fence? Or where do you see the gaps in service provider knowledge around operational technologies?
I think on the service provider side, the knowledge has been growing steadily because there is a recognition that those skills are different. They're unique and differentiated from a traditional IT environment because you really need to have a good understanding of how operational technology functions, what type of proprietary tech is used in those environments. And as you said, some of that technology is quite dated because you cannot necessarily upgrade OT environments as easily without causing downtime. It doesn't happen very often. And those environments are 24/7. They're running all the time. So that knowledge has to be, nurtured and grown. And you have to really source as a service provider that skill set, of people who have grown up doing so. Just like in the IT world, right? I grew up as an infrastructure person with hands-on work on everything from firewalls to servers to SANs and, databases. The same way we have to grow and nurture that same skill set from the operational side of things, as well as partnering with the vendors and OEM providers in that ecosystem to make sure we're not just developing skills for the present, but we're also developing and investing in skills for the future because we all are in this sort of battle together against the bad guys, right? So we're all in this together, the service providers, the OEM manufacturers, as well as our clients.
Harpreet, let's imagine a scenario now where you are an MSP that's been brought on to work for and handle cyber, manage cyber for an industrial or critical infrastructure type organization that has this IT OT convergence. If you're making a checklist of what are some of the first things you really need to do to get that cyber governance policy in place for this type of environment, what is going to be at the top of your checklist?
Well, number one thing is having an inventory of what are we looking at, right? Do we have the right inventory of all the assets in the environment? And do we have an understanding of who is doing what, who is in which role, and where do we have those gaps? So doing that assessment, I think, upfront is very important because it informs how far are we from actually meeting some of those gaps. And then really having a cybersecurity implementation plan. I kind of look back to the TSA security directive that was released, I think, last year and then refreshed again this year. It provides a really good sort of guardrail for operators and owners in OT environments to say, look, you got to have a cybersecurity implementation plan. You got to have an incident response plan. And you got to have an assessment plan and a program that is putting the basics in place. Things like patching, right? Things like what do you do when there's a cyber incident? Who do you call? You can't just take a system down when there's a OT incident, so to speak. You have to have a different response plan. and it has to be addressed and handled differently with collaboration between IT and OT. So I think those are some of the key things to look at when starting out, right? Do your assessment, understand your inventory, and build a program that's encompassing of people, process, technology all together, and apply the learnings from IT, because we've done it in IT many times, and those learnings will help us as long as we understand that the OT environment's different. Our action and response plans are going to be different.
I love the detailed step-by-step approach, and it leads me to a question of that first assessment that you're talking about. If it is plant and equipment at a power generating station, an oil derrick, right? We understand kind of the initial fundamentals of OT. Multiply that by the IoT phenomenon, and we start getting into a quantity of devices with IP addresses that might just blow the mind of the average IT person, right? We're familiar, like you said, there's a concept of there's server storage network. We understand the pieces, and we get into the end user and the endpoint devices. Okay, we start to deal with some quantity. As you're looking into these operational worlds, is IoT practical? Is it still concept? And if it is practical, what are the kinds of quantities that you're starting to see with smart connected devices that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, so on the IoT side of things, I'll give you an example of a vehicle SOC that we're actually helping a client with. So as the name applies, it's a vehicle SOC. So that means these are connected vehicles that we are monitoring telemetry from to understand how the vehicle is performing per its approved baseline. And is it within that threshold? Now, keep in mind, those connected devices don't have a whole lot of throughput back to report their telemetry. So there's only so much information that you're going to get in the form of telemetry, as well as you have to understand what those codes are when you receive them. So the knowledge and experience and the tools to help you make sense of that data that comes to you in the right context, so then you can take the right decisions and actions. Now, in the case of a vehicle SOC, you can imagine, a fleet of vehicles, or if not hundreds of thousands of vehicles, sending that data, right, back into your vehicle SOC, and that SOC then taking necessary actions to say, well, is the braking system being tampered with? Is the MCU in any form being tampered with? And reporting on those types of events against an approved baseline, I think, is an important factor of how you want to manage these things. And you also want to skill for these vehicle SOC type capabilities the right way. You want to build them the right way and have a collaborative way to drive any sort of response and testing of that equipment with your OEM providers. All right, we'll oftentimes work with our clients and our OEM partners in the ecosystem to say, bring your equipment into one of our centers and we'll test it. We'll do appropriate testing on it, learn in the test bed scenario as opposed to learning in the field, right? Which is oftentimes not the case that you want to take.
Harpreet, you had mentioned before patch management among some of the key considerations, in that relationship between Mssp and one of their clients in the industrial space, and developing policy around that. And I do have to think that is really one of the biggest potential sources of headache there, because you do have competing interests. You have this notion of, I'm trying to protect us from the inevitable future attack that might happen by exploiting such and such vulnerabilities. And yet you have people on the operational side going like, but that's still hypothetical and somewhere in the future. I'm worried about what's going on right now. We have cookies to make, or, whatever it is that they're, making, that they have machinery, or they're, or whether it's a utility, and like, you can't shut us down right now. It's going to, hurt our efficiency. We've got a business to run. So I don't know if you even have, an example or an anecdote of your own where you've had to deal with this, or maybe you can even just give some tips or recommendations on how to manage this especially prickly area, and how do you find that right balance between keeping productivity going, but ensuring against the potential for future attack, which could damage productivity down the line if the attack happens.
Yeah, I think what you're hitting on here is a very, very key sort of ingredient that's important to have in your programs, which is the right collaboration, whether it's your MSSP or your own teams, right? Working together between IT and OT. So yes, there are patches and 0 days that are always coming out that we have to find ways to mitigate risks for in an environment. But it's important to say, well, can I patch it and remediate the issue, or is there another way that I can mitigate it? And you have to be collaborative in that approach with your OT teams because they really understand the business process. They really understand how that side of the business works. And our job is to make sure we help them manage the risk, mitigate that risk to the best of our abilities together so that we can keep the business running and keep the business resilient. Right? That's the way I would recommend that we all look at it. And in this case, it's not the technology, it's the people that matter. It's the understanding of the processes that matter. And it's the collaboration between the teams that I think makes or breaks a program. Because if I just go in and say, well, you got to patch this no matter what, guess what? I might cause impact to the business or the end customers. If the grid goes down for power generation, I could take down power for X number of end customers, which is not good either. So I think collaboration is key. And the people and the process side of the house is very important to understand these matters.
See, and I think you're right on target. It always comes back to understanding the business performance or the outcome the customer is trying to accomplish. Those of us in cybersecurity, we like to believe that the outcome a customer is paying for is zero downtime from security attacks, right? We never got penetrated. We never got exposed. Our data never was exfiltrated. Success. But that's not the way the customer defines it, right? And now, as in your experience, as you've been looking into this operational world, who are the humans that are making these kinds of decisions, and what are the business outcomes they care about? Right. Yeah. I think that's going to be some tactical stuff that our service provider audience is going to be really interested in. We might be experts in technology, further experts in cybersecurity, but who are those humans across the aisle and what are the outcomes they actually care about?
Yeah, Ryan, the plant managers, the operations managers, right? They care about keeping their plants up and running. We worked with a client that had 80 or so different factories around the world, where one factory made an ingredient that was used downstream by 4 other factories. So it was very important to them that upstream factory didn't get impacted. So the risk tolerance for that factory was a lot lower compared to the ones that were downstream because of the impact on the product produced in one that's then used in the others to make, as was mentioned, making cookies or chocolates or whatever have you. So understanding the business element is important, and understanding that we need to partner with those right people across the aisle, across the table, to really relate to them in the way that they understand risk and keeping the business really resilient. It's not about being 100% cyberproof. I wish that were true, right? It's about how we respond to threats, how we respond to attacks, and how resilient is our business in the face of those threats.
Great advice.
Yeah. Harpreet, I also wanted to ask you. I know in speaking on this issue before, I'm familiar with instances where IT and OT in an organization can actually be allocated their own separate budgets for securing their processes, and therefore they may ultimately be working against each other, and the results might be siloed instead of having one uniform singular vision. So maybe this is a situation where if you are working within MSSP, they can kind of take that leadership role and provide the governance that is necessary, rather than having, compared to this other model where it's all being handled internally and you have IT and OT doing their own thing.
Yeah, I think having the right operating model is important. And oftentimes, service providers can sort of fit that gap, right? We can play on both sides, working with both sides to say, here's how we're going to drive outcomes with the OT teams and create those response plans and implement those technologies where budget's been allocated for certain, factories or plants to do improvement, whether it's assessment work, whether it's implementation work, or it's operational monitoring of what's been put in place. So I think, and all the while keeping the IT teams informed of what's happening and being that bridge across the two. And that's a good way to leverage, any kind of service provider that you might be looking at or clients are looking at to really make sure that do they have that experience? Have they done that? How have they helped their clients establish a cyber implementation plan, an assessment program, an incident response plan? So that all of those things that we spoke about earlier, the people, process, tech, work together to really bring the right outcomes from the investments that are being made and having that right operating model that bridges the gap.
See, and again, I think that's a new level of education that the service provider community needs to embrace. It's one thing to be an expert on technology, on NOC and SOC operations, on cybersecurity implementation. It's another thing entirely to understand that operational reality of the customer.
That's right.
It used to be enough to just be an expert in the services we provide and the technologies we maintain. It is now absolutely required that we step across the aisle and understand the business of the customer, the functional processes they operate, and then the underlying systems and technologies that facilitate those things. I think that's a whole new world. Can you kind of give us some advice in where do we find that kind of information? Where can a service provider go to get that level of industrial or operational knowledge?
Yeah, Ryan, you're hitting on something that's near and dear to my heart, which is, you can't really help protect a client if you don't know what their business is, right? Having industry knowledge, the business knowledge is absolutely core and fundamental to any service provider that is trying to partner with a client to do some services on their behalf, right? So we have another customer where we provide some services on the IT side, and it's important for us to understand what is their business, what do their key service line business leads care about, what does IT care about, and then look at it from a security lens. So it is looking at security through the lens of the industry. That's important for the business. As well as it's important for the cyber guys, because when we are responding to threats, we then understand the impact of those threats on the business, which is where the value really shines through, I think, in my opinion. If you've done this enough time, and that's kind of how we drive services with our clients, is to make sure we really, really understand, spending time with them to understand their business, what's critical, what's key. Are they delivering life-saving drugs to pharmacies across the world and hospitals across the world? And if they weren't able to do so because a distribution center went down, then what happens, right? What's the impact? So having that understanding is important, and spending the time to skill, not just technically, but also with the right business acumen, your people, I think is very important.
And again, I think that's where the real emotional reaction and the attachment to value from the customer decision makers is going to come from. As cybersecurity professionals, we've spent a couple of decades begging our customers to take us seriously, right? And it creates a whole lot of FUD out there in the marketplace. The sky is falling, and one penetration can put you out of business. We're famous for some overreactions and some really scary stuff, most of which real cybersecurity professionals tend to take a whatever type of an approach to. I'd love to know from your point of view, right? Just as we wrap up here, there are things that actual cyber professionals are actually scared by out there in the world, things that are FUD and things that we separate and go, no, really, we're not kidding. that one's actually for real. From your point of view as an actual cyber pro, what scares you out there in the technology world?
Boy, so I think our creators in the entertainment industry must be talking to some cyber people, because there was a show that came out about 10 years ago, I think, called Revolution. I had really high hopes for the show, but it goes to the basic plot is, all electricity around the world is gone, and we're back to pretty much pen and paper, if you will. And when I thought about it then, it wasn't a big deal. But when I think about the connected world that we live in today, how technology is in the fabric of everything that we do today, and how reliant our lives are on technology, the availability of basic technology is a dire critical need for all of us, right? So not being there is a big fear of mine, but also it's an opportunity, because that's what keeps me motivated to say, okay, I better not let anything happen to this because of the reliance we have. Be it the sensor, on my fridge that tells me that the fridge is working properly as an IoT sensor, or be it the chip in my car that keeps telling me how things are going with my car. When does it need service? Or the electricity that powers our homes and businesses and communities. So I think keeping those things safe is also a motivating factor for me. So while there is a fear factor of that and that show, but it also helps keep me motivated to continue to help our clients, our governments, and the communities we live in to keep them very, very cyber resilient.
A noble pursuit, I would say, right? Anybody who's ever spent any time in or around the electrical grid and all of the providers who are there, it's not FUD when we say that's not exactly the most resilient infrastructure. We should all probably figure out ways to spend a little time thinking about how to fix that. But I agree with you, right? That show was a great way to put us back into the mindset of, imagine a world without electricity, straight back into the 1800s, and now you got to figure out how to live. The difference between them and us is they actually knew how to live without electricity. We pampered folks in a modern world. We don't know how to start a fire. We don't know how to cook venison, right? Like there's a lot of deep things to be afraid of around that world. A world without electricity, that's a good one to be afraid of.
It's very true, Ryan. It's funny because I always think about that all the time, that, the more reliant we become on, increasingly complex technology, if that technology suddenly became unavailable to us, is there going to be anyone left over to remember, the old simple ways of how we used to do things? That, if we had to, kind of go back to a more, Stone Age mentality while we're recovering. And I mean, it's not that outlandish to think that there could be some kind of a large scale incident with the energy grid. I mean, we've seen incidents where Ukraine has lost power due to attacks that have been fairly roundly attributed to Russia. And so it's not like there isn't any precedent for this stuff whatsoever. So it's certainly something to watch out for.
It's a very real thing to consider. And while I will say, I do not personally possess all of the latest and greatest cybersecurity certifications, I do possess an Eagle Scout Award, and I know how to wield a pocket knife and how to start a fire. So maybe there's a future out there where survival as a service becomes a new resume item for us.
Absolutely. Well, I think with that, we'll end it there. But thanks again to Harpreet Sidhu for joining us today. Really glad you could be here. But that's not the end of our show. Don't go anywhere. We're only halfway done. Please return for the second half of our episode, featuring our security strategy topic of the week, our InfoSec News rundown, and our Dear Cyber for Hire advice column segment. See you in a moment on the other side.